This podcast is broadcasted on LinkedIn, and really it's about good news through a Christian lens. And, you're talking about your faith and how you live it out. But I think that the audience would be interested to know that you really, it took you time for you to believe, correct? It
Yes.
wasn't like you automatically jumped on the bandwagon. You really took the time to make sure that what you were preaching was true, and kind of touch on that a little bit if you can, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, without going into all the detail, I think I was raised here in Massachusetts, and so I think like most Massachusetts people, especially Irish, I was raised Irish Catholic by good, loving parents, devout Catholics. But I think I got to the point in my life where, like the mid-teenage years when, the various theories of evolution and the kind of anti-God ideas were pretty prevalent out there in the culture, where, my parents got to the point where they're just tired of trying to wake me up on Sunday mornings to get me out of bed to go to church with them. And I think at that point, I just started calling myself an agnostic. And that's kind of where I landed for a good portion of my adult life, married a Christian woman, but never really bought into the old Christian worldview until I was challenged, I think, long story short, by friends and family members to kind of disprove the Christian worldview, which was an interesting challenge for me because I'd never completely rejected the Christian worldview. I never had enough faith to call myself an atheist, I think, because to call myself an atheist, I would have had to deny all of the seeming evidences of design and fine tuning that are just, so evident in the universe. But I just kind of said, well, why the Christian worldview and not another religious, worldview? So what happened is, I think at that point in my mid 40s, I started studying, early 40s, actually, I started actually reading the Bible for the first time, looking for contradictions. I used to be very happy to tell people were there. And what I discovered, much to my chagrin, was that the Bible really doesn't have any contradictions. I mean, which is an amazing fact to me alone, because when you consider that the Bible was actually not just a single book, but it was a book written over a period of about 1,500 years by at least 40 human authors, 66 separate books by people from all, backgrounds. We've got shepherds and kings and everything in between. And just the fact that, like I couldn't, like I said, written over 3 continents as well. And the fact that, I could not find anything that truly was a contradiction in there. It was all very, very like a unified story that pointed to Christ. And especially when I started studying the Old Testament prophecies and things that were, clearly supernatural revelation as to, future events. There's over 300 Old Testament prophecies written about 1500 and 400 BC that pointed pretty squarely and directly to our Lord Jesus, like just things about his where he'd be born, how he'd be born, the three-year ministry and all the miracles and all the wonders he did. And then also we find in the Old Testament so many things pointing to his death and even his resurrection. So at that point, there was kind of an intellectual assent to at least the biblical worldview, and which was pretty amazing to me. I always thought I was, kind of too educated and intelligent, not to kind of concede the fact that I had this kind of cocky mindset to even need a crutch, is like I used to call it. But God just did an amazing thing when it was an intellectual assent to the biblical worldview. But then what happened is because of that, I opened my heart, and God just really revealed some things to me that, I won't tell the whole story now, but it just what God revealed to me once I was able to surrender my heart was that the other things were, how can I best say it? It just, he moved around some things in my life that led me to a point I had no place to go but to surrender my heart as well. I'll leave it like that. Yeah.
So we mentioned in the very beginning, Mike, that you spent a long time in the media industry and then moved over to teaching. And I know that maybe that move wasn't voluntary. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, honestly, teaching was always part of my long-term plan. I, all the sports I'd coached, I just enjoyed, being around young people, helping them kind of find themselves, whether it be through sports or just kind of maturation. But I didn't plan on turning to teaching until after I retired out of the media, industry. But then, COVID. I mean, I was a news reporter. I was a news editor for about over 20 years, and then I jumped into the dark side of the media industry, which, of course, marketing, and that went pretty well. I mean, through like the early 2000s and all that. The money was good, the hours were good. I enjoyed it, and I could still do a little bit of writing on the side, so it was a good life. But I mean, how many people do we know today who still get a newspaper? So that industry was constantly morphing, constantly evolving, and because of what it was already kind of doing. There was this decline going on, and of course, most of the marketing efforts switched over to like digital platforms. But when COVID hit, it just fell over a cliff, and I lost basically my entire book of business. And I voluntarily took a buyout after trying to work from home for several months. They offered a buyout because obviously the company, Gatehouse Media, was not doing well. And I had, I was taking my my licensing test for high school English. And I took it and I passed it, and I just said, "Hey, I'll take the voluntary buyout. And I'm going to go into teaching." And that was in January. I took the buyout in December 2020, and went into teaching about a month later. And so I always wanted to get into teaching, but like I said, that plan was expedited by COVID, frankly.
So how do you like teaching? I mean, you do it in various aspects. You do it in middle school, you do it on the field, and you do it in your studies.
Yes.
I mean, is that something you're passionate about, teaching as a whole?
Yeah, I think God kind of hardwired me that way, to be honest. I mean, we call them now, spiritual giftings, but also I think it was a proclivity. I think I enjoy, and what I enjoy most about teaching is actually kind of class discussion. Just, Proverbs 27 has a great passage which says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. So in the teaching process, I think it's just, a lot of times, especially with English and social studies and obviously, theology, it's kind of an exchange of observations and ideas. And I try to challenge my my students with critical thinking, something that I think we don't see enough of in this day and age. I think it's kind of like, you type something into your phone and AI's got the answer and you just kind of accept it. Yeah. But I think just thinking on our own is something that is slowly fading away. That aspect of, hearing something and examining it and investigating and digging in and just, and then formulating your own thoughts and opinions. You just don't see enough of that. I mean, we look at the political spectrum where it just seems like everybody's either way over here or way over there, as opposed to, both sides actually have pretty good ideas. Can we just, try to come together on those rather than just screaming louder than the next guy? So, yeah, I think that, trying to get people engaged and engage their critical thinking is something I enjoy doing.
Now, you mentioned that you run a Bible study for people with special needs children.
Yeah. Yes.
How do you think that churches and maybe faith communities can do a better job to support people with disabilities and their families? And if so, what advice would you give to folks that are looking to start something like this?
Oh, boy, Scott, that's a great question. I think New Hope Chapel, Plymouth, has been extremely supportive of this. I think what happens a lot of times, especially if you've got a special needs adult and a special needs child, you seek government assistance so much that I think you forget that there are a lot of grassroots organizations out there like what I'm doing. So I just think it's kind of, and it's funny because I coach Special Olympics, and I think a lot of the parents I've been involved with over the years naturally assume that I'm part of some state agency or same thing with maybe the Bible study. Like, it's like, no, I've never taken a penny from anything I've done before. It's just volunteering. But I think I don't think people realize there's grassroots enough, that there's grassroots organization that are not necessarily government funded, but that can be a good thing. I don't have an agenda beyond wanting to help. So could we do a better job of it? Absolutely. And I think it's just kind of, educating people the idea that, sometimes the best, programs available are those that don't have an agenda, that just want to reach the individual and help, as opposed to like, okay, I get government funding for this, so I might have like other ideas for like what's best for that child, and I might be being told what's best for that child. With me, it's just and my wife, who really runs the special needs study, I just show up and teach. She makes all the she makes all the arrangements. But yeah, so yeah, that's a good question. It actually got me thinking quite a bit. But I guess that would be my kind of general way of thinking is I think we, as a society, we need more grassroots organizations, and not to just always seek that reliance on what the government might provide.